Well, I thank you for joining us today. I'm John Dean. I'm a speech language pathologist. I'm joined here by Josefa Domingos, the physio, and our great friend Nancy Hillmer is joining from Colorado, an excellent occupational therapist that we've known for probably more than a decade now. So we're looking forward to talking to you today. And we're going to talk a lot about holiday meal times, holiday dining experiences, and particularly how they intersect with changes in swallowing that many people with Parkinson's experience. So we're going to kind of come at it in three different directions. When we're thinking about holiday experiences, we're looking at usually a family meal at home. Sometimes it could be a small meal, or you could have people coming in from outside. It could be going to another house. It could be friends. It could be, other family members. And then events at restaurants or other public settings. And we're going to talk about specific problems and how to solve them in these environments. So I'm sure if you've had any experience with Parkinson's, you realize that swallowing is an issue that can affect many people. I would say that at some point in the progression over time with Parkinson's, you're going to see some issues crop up. And we're all familiar with the basics of swallowing, but actually swallowing also affects other areas. So like if you're having issues with communication or you're in an environment that's really noisy, that's going to influence your ability to swallow. If you have any mobility issues or postural issues, that's going to affect the swallowing. And then cognition and fatigue kind of go hand in hand, especially for attention and being able to stay focused. And all of these are going to tie in to swallowing issues that you might experience during the holidays. And kind of the genesis for this came from somebody who was saying that, the struggles they're facing with swallowing robbed me of simply enjoying the meal. It's connecting with others while we eat and fully participating in the holiday festivities. And to break that down a little bit, if you're so focused on making sure that you're getting calories and you're also eating in a way that is not, messy and you're getting the food in properly, it takes a lot of attention, it takes a lot of focus, and really you just want to be with your friends and enjoying your time with your family. And so we're going to talk a little bit about ways you can address these issues. Just to keep it really high level, we're not going to get super scientific, but I do think it's helpful for everyone to understand the kind of the four basic phases of swallowing. The first one is what we call pre-oral. That's from the plate to the mouth. This is really a domain of an occupational therapist like Nancy, anything that's related to positioning or utensils or even cognition and changes in vision and stuff that might intersect with me a little bit, but it's really Nancy's world. Once you get the food in your mouth, the oral phase is when you're chewing the food and you're preparing it into a cohesive, what we call a bolus, something you're getting ready to swallow. And then you have it in the pharynx. This is the first part of the swallowing, and then it goes into the esophagus. And those are the basic areas. We can do a lot for pre-oral. We can do plenty for oral. As you start hitting towards pharyngeal and esophageal, it's not so much tips and tricks. It's probably working with a clinician at some point, but we can get into all that. So we're going to really focus on factors that can influence the different phases and give you the tips as best we can.
I think if we want to start from the beginning is being able to think about sitting position. Okay, so, and I'm sure this is always a struggle even early on. It's like, how am I sitting? How am I getting up from the chair? The transfers and how this will influence how we are facilitating the process of eating. So if we think about just some tips, I think the first one that you will probably hear often would be keeping an upright position, so that obviously we are placing all our anatomical pieces together in terms of the food going into the right places, right? I often see if the person eats something and then they turn to the side to talk with someone, and then that's usually a precipitating factor of maybe a choking event, right? So this reflecting on this, it means if we look, we have a picture here. If we look at an image like this, how can we constantly think about helping as a care partner? Let's think about this. I know that it's often reported as, but I keep telling the person to stand upright, right? So there is a repetition of this. And so we wanted to highlight that obviously this is important, but we also have to have good sense. And how can we maybe help the person have some non-verbal cues? So sometimes just either touching the person in a specific way so that you are correcting without verbalizing it might be helpful to reduce the amount of times that we actually say, put yourself right or upright. And so this is what you see there in the image. I do like the thinking about how much phones have come or part of our lives at this moment. And even when we're in a meal, everyone's always taking pictures of everything. So I think it's every time we take a picture, people seem to correct their posture. So it's a natural thing that's already in our environment. But we did want to highlight that, yes, there are strategies for the person to be able to, when you are sitting down, already being able to correct your posture. But I would highlight the secrets of maybe separating your feet would be a nice tip to remember, because sometimes the feet are too close together and that will stress the body more. And that means you get more tired. And once the fatigue sets in, then the posture changes increase, right? But that's really focusing on posture. And obviously we can go into more detail on that if that is a problem. So the strategies for you to be able to stand upright, and we can use others to help us as well, to be able to cue us. Maybe it doesn't even have to be a touching. It can be a secret code that you have with your husband or your wife. And where maybe if you pull your ear, that means you're giving the person a cue that his posture is not as good as maybe you wish. So that's, I think it's just secret, different ways for us to be able to reinforce this.
Nancy, before we get into it, I mean, do you have anything about positioning with any cushions or anything like that? Anything we should add into this part? Sometimes I see in chairs you put something in there, like a wedge or something.
Yeah, you can, or certainly a chair with armrests, or you can do a wedge, depending on which way the person tends to tilt. You could also put a block of some kind under one foot if they tend to drift to one side. The other thing that I see is people tend to, not all, but some people will tend to tuck their feet way under the chair. And so you really shortchange your balance a lot. When you have your feet out in a more comfortable position out in front, about shoulder width apart, it's like they make a triangle with your hips. So you've got a lot of support. When you've got them tucked under, you're just kind of balancing on one point. It'd be like trying to balance a top on your finger. You know, it's not as easy as if you had a tripod. I don't know if I'm explaining that very well.
Perfect.
But yeah, there are different ways that you can position at a table, and then decide too, along with what Josefa is saying, where do you want your care partner to sit to be able to give you those cues? Is it better to sit side by side and maybe a little tap on the shoulder is what you've decided on as a couple will work for the cue? Or if it's straight across from the other person and you can give the little sting. I always think of the movie The Sting, where they're all going around giving the secret little code. Anything that you can arrange to that's agreeable to both people, because you certainly don't want to be pointing out more than is necessary. Yeah, you kind of have to agree on it.
Yeah, that thing with the feet going under it, that's another reason why I don't like sometimes sitting at a table that's got a high top where my feet are dangling, because it's the same problem as I can't really get enough stability. You know, Parkinson's or not. So, okay, good.
Right. Yeah, those 2 feet on the floor, kind of out in front, separated about shoulder width, they do make a difference. It doesn't seem like they would, but if you really think about it, it does make a difference.
Right. Okay,
And
great.
I think we think about, you sit down, you use these strategies, but the truth is, after a while, you'll start getting tired. And so obviously that's when the posture starts changing. So I think one of the important strategy would also be to think about moments of getting up more often. And this is not something that people will appreciate a lot, first of all, because it's exercise, right? Getting up. But it's the struggle sometimes associated to getting out of a chair from a table, particularly, is challenging. But the truth is, in order to be able to bypass this posture in time, we'd probably suggest getting up more, sitting maybe in a place of the table where you can maybe get in and out more easily, might be something to consider. Maybe if you are in control of the meal, so if it's in your house and maybe you can eat in different venues, so you're changing the activities, so you make everyone changes with you. I think these were ideas for us to be able to just keep our bodies activated.
I like the idea, like you guys have very commonly had coffee after meals, and like that'd be a great chance to go somewhere
Yeah.
else, or pie or something like that.
And so another suggestion would be to think about this. When we think about taking the food to the mouth, and obviously if the less stress I have to take my food to the mouth, probably it will influence the whole process. So that's why we're going from posture, and this is a suggestion that of sitting. I often have lots of meals with people with Parkinson, and one of the things that I see very often is the fact that the elbows are actually quite close to each other. In Portugal, where I live, we usually use a lot the knife and the fork, right? So I think this can be very characteristic to our country, but maybe I'll have to observe more meals in the US. The problem with the elbows being too close, I hope you guys can see my hands, yes? So if my elbows are like this, that means that the way that I'm handling the fork changes completely, right? The position of my hand changes. So if I place it like this, that means, I'm sorry, I should have a fork here with me, but that means that the position of my hand is placed in a more favorable way for me to be able to actually make the effort of cutting the meat or grabbing something. So it's just keeping in mind that sometimes small details like this make a big difference in how much strength that you might perceive that you have in your hand, which is not really about the strength, it's about the way you place in your hand and the way the elbows are very tight and very close to each other.
I was going to say, in the same way as you look at, the distance, the width around you, there's also your height compared to the table. So you want to be at a comfortable height so that you're not having to hunch your shoulders up to get to your food. And also you don't want to have to bend over to get to your food because your chair is too high. So there's all kinds of little spacing considerations.
And I would highlight sometimes it's the family will often say, it's the person's really bending forward, right, to go get the food. So it's instead of the hand going to the mouth, it's the mouth that's going to the hand, right? So just being attentive that is already a reflection of fatigue. And I wanted to, this picture was interesting. It's like it was an interesting way they were setting the table, because it actually places all the food like in the center. And like, again, in my culture, we have food all around us. So even if you're trying to open up your elbows, it's very challenging because you have the bread, you have the wine, and so I thought this was a very interesting educational photo of, okay, they've highlighted exactly where the food is. So you have all that space for your hands to move.
There's an interesting comment coming in from the chat. It said, when you speak of cutting food, it is a function of how close people are packed at the table. And that's exactly the point, is that if you can be in control of that and get a situation where either you are on the corner or somewhere where you have a little more room, it's not unlike if you've ever been in a situation where you're trying to go through kind of a narrow space in a doorway or something like that. That's often an area of trouble for someone with Parkinson's, for walking, for freezing a gait. And it's the same thing. If you're feeling really constricted here, if you can open it up, it's going to improve the experience. In addition to the other factors that Nancy and Josefa were talking about the height of the table and making sure you're not leaning forward. Swallowing is very gravity based. And so when you're leaning forward, you're interfering with a lot of the gravity that we would normally use in order to help, along with air pressure and other components and muscles. But
I think one of the ways to bypass that, well, in a more humorous way, is just select the people you want to invite to the party. That's more humorous, okay? But now, seriously, obviously, we don't have control over that. But the truth is maybe selecting the place on the table where maybe you get the access to more space would be wise.
I like the idea of like, I'm sorry, you
Like in a
can't come to
tip
the
of the
party.
table.
Doctor's orders. The doctor says you can't come. I'm really
Just,
sorry.
I think more and more the families, we have to be reasonable about how many people we choose, but
That's probably a good one. Bigger is not better, right?
Mm.
For a lot of stuff. So we
Right.
actually talk about that. Talking about that first phase again, getting
Mhm.
into the pre-oral phase, there are some tricks you can use.
Yeah, but I think we can think about obviously adaptive devices are always, there are several out there, but when we're thinking about, families coming over, if you go to another place that you might not know, maybe you consider taking, if you have one already, right?
Yeah.
That could be a strategy, but I'm usually in favor, let me see if I wrote it down. Yes, I often suggest not making too many differences because I think that places the person maybe in a position which is not so generous. And so I'd probably give everyone adapted
Yep.
knives and forks and whatever you need, because just wrap everything up with some more tape or something and make them thicker so that everyone can grab on. I think it's a nice way to just be solidary with the difficulties. I think I'm probably not finding the right word, but
Well,
it's
it would help
important.
everybody. I mean, a divided plate would
Yeah.
be great for everyone at a mealtime. And I think we're getting smarter when you go to different stores to purchase things that people are realizing that teeny tiny little
Yeah.
forks, they got a little hairpin, it's like no one needs that. We need something you can actually grip. And I don't care, it's not Parkinson's or not. It's just you need better design stuff. Of course, Nancy can give you some tricks for maybe building up something so you can make it on the fly, but just buying better,
Yeah.
easier to hold stuff.
Yeah, it would be important to test that out. I would be more interested in how it feels to hold it and how secure your grip is with it than I would with if it looks a certain way. I'd go for the feel versus the look every time.
Mhm.
This is funny because that's where culture plays a very important part, where I often deal with a lot of people with Parkinson, that the social aspect and the stigma is very strong. And I know, obviously, from an American culture, you guys are very practical, so that's awesome.
Well,
And maybe it's not such an issue, but yeah. So this strategy was really focused on if it is an issue and if there is like, I don't want to be different or highlighted as having more difficulties, then just give the same, decorate them all the same, and yeah.
everyone has it. To me, it's almost like high heels or uncomfortable leather shoes with a suit or
Yeah.
something. It's like something that looks very elegant, may not have much function. And really getting back to what Nancy said, it's all about how it feels in your hand and how well you can use it to eat,
Yeah.
because that's the point. Another thing that's very common, and you can do this very much in a group environment, and especially because it's a social gathering, is finger foods, or it's just a nice way to add items that you can gather and it's socially acceptable to pick up, a carrot stick and put it into something, or pieces of cheese or whatever. So that helps a lot. And then if you can situate the table a little bit so you're anticipating those needs a little bit, it also helps because you don't want people leaning way over and having to really work that hard. So these are all just ways to.
Specifically when you're eating, right? Okay, so I put some mashed potatoes in my mouth and then, oh, I want some peas as well. So I'm reaching out at that moment. So
Yeah.
it might be details that sometimes we don't think about.
Yeah, you can think about it ahead of time, or you fix it on the fly, either way. Now, another thing we want to talk about is noise, especially when you're going out to a public environment, especially if they have background music, or if someone's playing a holiday song about stretchy pants before the lecture starts or whatever, and there's music playing in the background. That can have a huge influence because people with Parkinson's have a tendency to speak pretty quietly already, and then they got to talk over that. Really noisy environments, it'll induce a lumbar effect, and that's not the issue, but quite often there's a lot of white noise, and then they're trying to work into that. So try to get into a situation if you can cut background noise, if you can turn the music off during the mealtime. And if the environment is too cramped and too noisy, maybe finding a way to pull out and get an environment that is situated a little bit to the side so there's not so much work trying to be heard over that. And then while you're talking about noise, we usually think about hearing, but don't neglect visual noise. So at a restaurant, if you're facing and there's someone new walking by every 30 seconds, that's going to be a lot of distraction. That's going to take a little bit of energy to either not pay attention or pay attention and then come back to the conversation. So getting to an environment where you can maybe have a wall, or you're in a booth and it's got a high wall so that there's not a lot of visual things happening, that helps quite a bit. And then kind of coming back to the lighting, lighting is really huge, again, because if you have sufficient lighting right in front of you, that's great. It makes it really easy to see, the eyes and the lips and the teeth and everything like that. But if you have too much lighting coming from behind you, it has a tendency to backlight and means that you really won't be able to see the face very well. And also, all that additional light, all those lumens, will actually strain the system, the eyes a little bit, and make it fatiguing. So again, noise is noise, whether it's coming to your ears or coming through your eyes, and you want to be aware of it. Another thing that might be helpful, and this gets back to we were taking breaks before, shortening the times at the table, having a venue change, maybe going somewhere else for dessert, maybe sitting somewhere else for a cup of coffee afterwards or another drink. And these are all ways to kind of mitigate. When you hear about noise levels being measured, like by OSHA, it's volume times time. And so if you cannot always control the volume, you can control the amount of time, and both of those will improve the meal time.
So I was looking for photos that maybe would have key messages, and this was an interesting one that caught my attention, because again, technology is part of our world at this moment, and you have Zoom meals as well. In case you didn't know, it's a thing. But that means that there might be distractions, like as you see, obviously in the picture. And I would probably say that most commonly it's the person that most dominates technology, where he has the device turned to him because he can put up the volume or whatever and control it. So sometimes just be aware that things like this, where the person is really reaching out to be able to see, or it's a distracting factor. Obviously, if you already eating, it's not the case. But it's things that are creeping up into our lifestyle, and we might not be attentive of where the person is, and maybe placing this computer in a different way would be just an example about how we can assess the stuff that happens in our own environment, right? It's impossible for us to know. Each one of you probably have a different setting. So it's just key messages about us. Try to gain that expertise of looking, where am I in space, right? When we are eating.
The nerd in me is very nervous about having bottles of wine next to my computer on the table, but yes, very well said, for sure.
And I think if you're going to eat at someone else's house or a restaurant or a place that you have at least some control, and you want these tips that we're talking about, okay, where can I sit, and all these strategies, just maybe communicating with the family in advance and saying, maybe we need to think about how this goes, and we'll stand up more often and let us all do it together, So again, the not making a difference and just making it new habits, creating maybe new traditions, not being so stuck to the things that it has to be this way. We have to be on the couch watching whatever you watch on Christmas for 2-3 hours straight without getting up, and let's eat and eat and eat in the same position for hours. That's Portugal. So I don't know about you.
Gonna have some bowl games, I'm sure, around Christmas.
Oh, it's bowl games. Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, specific to fatigue, I mean, and what you're saying there is absolutely apropos as far as not being married to traditions that you don't benefit from, or at least breaking them up and really picking the ones that are really meaningful to you and your family, and getting rid of things, like if staying up till midnight so you can open up the first gift is a thing, and maybe that's not the best way to manage that. Maybe you can let that go and do something more meaningful with your family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just thinking about the impact that this can have through the whole experience of obviously the event itself. But if we focus on the swallowing itself, it's like, yes, one of the main activities is about the eating, right? The talking and the eating in these events. And so fatigue will play a very important role in how you can do these activities.
Yeah.
So keeping that in mind, that's one of the symptoms that will get you.
Yeah, I mean, fatigue is a factor in Parkinson's particularly, or it's one of those very prominent, often occurring, and then you go to an environment where you have a lot of interaction, and you're getting some food in you, and maybe you're having a glass of wine, and all of a sudden it just all catches up to you. So you should have some strategies for managing that. Sometimes that can be just, as much of having a place where you can go sit down away from the crowd, or even lie down if you need a little bit of a rest. But again, really picking your traditions is probably the easiest thing to start with.
And you might even want to suggest the time for the meal based on your medications when you're on, or have had a little bit of time in between the meal with the protein, interacting with your meds and that kind of thing. But certainly to be more on at the meal would be very helpful with your meds. And perhaps people could schedule the time of the meal and all the interactions around that.
Okay, just speaking directly to swallowing problems in Parkinson's, there are a lot of foods that we will have put in front of us that are probably not the easiest things to eat. And if you go to certain kinds of like medical settings, they'll take anything you love and chop it into something you don't, and that's not really the way I would do that. I think you have a lot of options, but when you're kind of surveying what's at the table, if it's difficult for you to cut and get it into the right size so you can put it in your mouth, it's probably going to be difficult to eat when you do get it in your mouth. So all of the intact heavy meats, all the steaks or the pork chops and the prime ribs, those are a lot of work, and you're going to have to spend quite a bit of time chewing. And again, getting back to the fatigue side of things, that could take a little bit out of you. And then, add to that any of the raw vegetables, if you got like I said, the carrots and the celery sticks and stuff like that. Those can be a bit, salad is actually quite a bit of work, because usually with a salad, you got a lot of different consistencies, things that are heavier and things that are lighter, and then maybe you have some dressing, so it's a mixed consistency. I want to point out a couple of items that I usually try to steer people away from at these kind of things, because they have some stringiness to it. So like an asparagus and celery, if you don't chew it all the way through, you might have it where you have a piece of it and a piece of it connected by a string inside of it, and that's a little dangerous. So if you can take those off your list while you're in this environment. Now, I don't say get rid of asparagus forever, but at a public meal where you're already kind of contending with other stuff, it might be good to move on to something different. These scatter consistencies are things that tend to break off from the bolus. And remember, you're chewing, you have saliva, you make this cohesive little ball of food that you're going to swallow. And if it's rice, well, maybe a couple of grains of it scatter off, and while you're swallowing, it doesn't go all the way down because it didn't go with the whole bolus. Or popcorn, that's another big one. So those are things that you might either add something like a gravy to make them cohesive, or bypass them. And then things that are pretty dry, again, we don't think about this, but we need that saliva, we need that moisture in order to get that down. So if you're drinking a lot of or eating a lot of dry things like bread, it's going to make it difficult all the time. You're going to spend more energy. And I alluded to this mixed consistencies already, but anytime you have a solid item with a liquid, you're trying to control the solid while the liquid's kind of going wherever the heck it wants. That's a problem. So you want to be careful with that. So like soups that have lots of vegetables in them, that could be kind of a problem. The classic example is always cereal, although not really apropos to tonight's dinner, but things that are like that are things you want to be aware of. And instead of those things, you really should be looking for ways to get foods that taste good, that are naturally softer, that are naturally have the characteristics you're looking for. So maybe some poultry, maybe instead of an intact meat, maybe you have a meatloaf, or maybe you have fish. Fish is always good. We got tons of great fish here in Portugal. If you're going to do hors d'oeuvres, maybe you lightly steam some of the vegetables so they're easier to chew and break down. And I don't think just the people with Parkinson's are going to be thankful you did that. I think a lot of people are like, I don't want to work this hard before the meal. Incorporating moisture is very valuable, so don't neglect condiments. Gravy is obviously a no-brainer during Thanksgiving, but all kinds of sauces and all kinds of mustard and mayo and whatever else you can do to add that, it lubricates the food and it makes it easier to go down. Again, we were talking about the soups before. Instead of a traditional kind of vegetable soup that we would have in the States, maybe you do something that's much softer, like a squash soup or something like that. And then obviously I put a pumpkin pie. Many people know how much I love pumpkin pie. It's a no-brainer. It works really well. Maybe just the pumpkin pie filling, though. You don't need to necessarily worry about the crust and everything like that. And again, we're talking about those scatter consistencies, the rice and stuff like that. You can always have, you can't go wrong with mashed potatoes. It's pretty straightforward. And they 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 taste pretty good anyways, but if you add a little bit of gravy to it, it's just really pretty good. And then we mentioned finger foods. If I was to critique this plate, and I'm when I pulled this picture up originally, for sure the fruits in there would be perfect. I think the nuts would be a little bit of work. You might be careful. And then the cheese would be fine. It's just whether or not the cheese is going to interfere with the absorption of your levodopa. And for those of you who don't know, there is a tendency, not for everyone, usually not that early on. So it's usually people who've had Parkinson's a little bit longer. There's a tendency for the food that has protein to interfere with the absorption of particularly the Sinemet. And the other medications, not as much, but the Sinemet, which is the carbidopa, levodopa, those are generic formulations, specifically where the levodopa gets absorbed right after the stomach opens up in a duodenum. That's also where the medications and protein both get absorbed in the same place, and that's why they compete. And so again, my little fruit tray or finger food tray here, I got a lot of cheese on there. That might not be your best choice. You have to decide, and if you're really dealing with that, you should talk with the doctor because there's some options they can give you. But if you're out at a meal and you're kind of scouting what you should and shouldn't eat, I'd go with the fruit first or the vegetables first. Another thing that you might be aware of is anything that's going to influence your cognition, and particularly things that are going to exacerbate fatigue. And usually that's alcohol. So you want to be real careful. This is not a time to push that envelope while you're trying to have a meal. We do want to just talk a little bit about hearing and vision. Nancy alluded to this very well early on about lighting and the ability to see someone with high items on the table. And in general, if you don't take in information as well visually and you're not taking it in as well auditorily, it's not going to get processed. You're not going to be able to pay attention to it. You're going to have to spend a lot more energy if your hearing is a little bit not as good as it should be, or you have a lot of noise in the background. It's one of these things where you can see study after study where if you add some background noise into a stimulus, the amount of effort someone has to use and the amount of frustration they have trying to understand what's being said, it goes up quite quickly, and it doesn't take a whole lot of stimulus to really get it out of whack. So anything you can do to improve your vision, whether that's wearing your glasses, whether that's proper lighting, and same thing for hearing, and that also goes for the spouse, it's always going to improve your ability to communicate. Just a couple more slides and make sure we get some time to talk and answer questions. Drooling is another issue that many people with Parkinson's experience. Often, if you're in the middle of a mealtime, it's not quite as prominent because you're actively using your mouth. But during conversations or when you're kind of sitting around, that's when you want to maybe have some tricks to address it. If you're dealing with this as an ongoing part of your Parkinson's, definitely talk to your doctor. They have a lot more options between botulinum toxin, Botox, and certain medications. It could also be valuable to work with a speech therapist. So if you can find some ways to actually really address it, that'll be better. But in a pinch, having a towel nearby, keeping something discreet. I've seen people use wristbands sometimes if it's discreet enough and you have something to wipe your mouth. Just remembering to swallow more frequently helps. And if you're out in a group setting and you know that you're going to run into this issue, doing something to keep your mouth busy with some ice cubes or some hard candy, that will often help the drooling. Now, the candy sometimes will stimulate more saliva, but generally you're managing it pretty well. And then kind of like some of the other cues, if you have a nice discrete cue from your care partner, that can be a nice one too, just to give you a little bit of awareness. And then gastroesophageal reflux disorder, or GERD, is very common in Parkinson's. It's about 3 times the rate of incidence for people who don't have Parkinson's. And the tendency for us all to overeat at the holidays is going to make it worse. So you want to be real careful about that with portion control and making sure you're not overdoing it. You might want to make sure you have some nice over-the-counter medications available. They actually make newer versions of antacids that are just like little gummy chewable, not gummy, like they almost like a Starburst. And so those are easy and discreet. So you might keep some of those around and bring them with you in case you need it during a holiday meal. And then I keep what I call reflux precautions in mind. So that's avoiding foods that are too acidic. So the tomatoes and citrus fruit are two big offenders. Adding coffee into that can be sometimes problematic. Coca-Cola can be problematic. And then after a meal, try not to get flat. Keep yourself a little bit elevated. And avoiding situations where you really got to reach over and bend over like you're tying your shoes. Those are things that you don't want to do with a full stomach. If you are dealing with GERD, again, talk with your doctor to see what some options are. You usually want to start by trying to address it with diet because a lot of the long-term medications aren't perfect.
I think related to the idea of overeating, but not to GERD itself, is for me the impact of impulse control on meal times and especially situations where maybe it's a buffet and you can go through and the person perhaps has impulse control issues around sweets or whatever it is. But I've seen people just, go back and back and back and back and back for sweets, just not really aware of or able to control that impulse. And so it's something to keep in mind. Maybe it's better for that person not to have a buffet style thing, but have a meal served to them. That's it. There it is.
And again, we're just closing this off with kind of our summary, for people living with Parkinson's and the care partners, you're going to start with an upright posture. You're going to take your time and pace yourself. When you're talking and communicating, it's okay to use nonverbal gestures, use your eye contact and say, hey, I need some more time to speak. Don't let them jump on top of you. And if your care partner can help do some traffic cop, that's good too. Talking and eating, all that stuff your mom told you, it's true. Your speech therapist agrees. Your mom was right. So don't do that at the same time. Finger foods and things that are easy to eat, that's great. Those are great options. And as you're planning meals, adding more of those into the mix will make it easier to basically focus on, enjoying the food rather than making sure you have the right elbow room and getting it from your plate to your mouth. And again, we mentioned having a snack before. For the care partner, noise is the enemy. Distractions are the enemy as well. So visual distractions, anything that you can do to cut that out is helpful. So if it's your place, turn down the Christmas carols while we're having the meal. The lighting, again, the backlighting really obscures visibility. So be mindful of placement. And then the adaptive equipment we talked about, make it available to everybody. Make it part of the style. That's great. And then I talked a little bit about the communication aids and exploring it. I love the idea, Nancy. The Apple Store, go to the Genius Bar if you're an Apple person, or a relevant version for Android, because you can get a lot there. And bringing your own tools when you need to, that can be helpful as well. So do you have something you want to add there? Yeah. Do you have any questions?
I think just like avoiding asking people questions right after they've taken a bite, because it does take some energy and conscious effort to chew strong. I used to say chew strong, swallow hard to my folks, just to get them to really focus on what they were doing once they put that food in their mouth. And as you know, if you've ever tried to do two things at once, like in one of our classes, it's not easy. So if you ask somebody a question right as they're taking that bite, it's going to distract them from what they're trying to do with their food. So yeah, one thing at a time.
So can we answer any questions? Anybody have any thoughts or insights or things that we could add to? This is a really important one. What do you do if during meals a person coughs with eating or gets things caught in their throat? And most commonly in Parkinson's, the most common thing I see is what we call aspiration, where bits of liquid usually, but sometimes food. And if you're doing food and liquid, the liquid's going to go down fast because it goes path of least resistance while the food's still getting managed. And that's a sign of a swallowing problem that you definitely want to get a referral and you want to work with a speech language pathologist, because that's the kind of thing that you might need to strengthen the musculature, and you probably want to do some work on how you're going to structure your meal. You might also get a referral to an OT if that becomes part of the issue, but for sure, coughing at meal times is a key indication of a swallowing problem, and you should call your doctor and just get a referral. And I'm sorry to be all super, but I'm a speech therapist. Key factor, call up Dr. Faulkner and ask him for a referral to an SLP.
Well, what I was thinking is probably if the person wants an immediate solution. And what I was thinking is this probably is already happening. If it is already happening, so you already more or less know how to manage it. So for example, the person coughs once and it probably is going to continue. So if you are in a dining table and this is happening, you can predict more or less what's going to happen because it's happened if it's happened before, right? So it's a difference if it's happening for the first time or if this is something that unfortunately is part of daily activities already. Because in that situation, you might want to consider those, where can I sit if this happens that I can easily maybe take the person out away from the setting, so that you don't have everyone over trying to help. That I was just thinking about probably immediate solution. That's what I'm looking for.
And there's another part to this. They say things caught in the throat. If they're having a situation where it feels like the food's not getting down into the throat like that, that might even get more towards making sure the meal is happening at a pace. They might be taking too much food in at once. It could be kind of impulsivity or absent-mindedness. You're talking, that's great. When all of a sudden you have too much food in your mouth. So that's another side of it.
When I see it's that what I said initially, when the person is responding to someone, put something in the mouth, is chewing and responding, and just assessing if it is really a choking event, how severe is it, right? Or is it just something that usually happens? And the way that we deal with it is just calmly trying to keep the head upright in an upright position, in a forward position, trying to breathe calmly and trying to see if it doesn't be worse. So I don't know if that makes sense, but usually just trying to control the crisis situation that probably is already happening.
I think that drawing attention away, trying to calm the people around, because it's disturbing. And I mean, we've all done it before, where you swallowed something down the wrong way and you just cough and cough and cough, which is what you need to do. And no slap on the back or drinking water is going to help it. You just have to get it. You just have to go through it. But the more that people hang around and watch, the greater the anxiety, and probably the less effective their cough will be, because they're getting anxious and tightening up, is what I'm thinking. So just trying to keep calm. Coughing is what you got to do. It's when they stop coughing and they give the sign that they are not having an air exchange, that's when you need to worry and actually take action with the Heimlich maneuver and call 911. But if they're coughing, that's what they need to do. And if it happens a lot, you may not want to be in real public places and eating the kinds of foods that trigger that.
I was going to highlight that when we start coughing, no usual behavior is you're going to turn sideways, right? Because you don't want to cough onto the food. So this is when I'm talking about you turning, so you're just making it worse because the saliva is getting in, right? So it's like being able to turn the whole body to be able to really cough it out might be also something that helps.
That's a good
at our time here, guys. I just want to make sure we don't overstay. Does anyone else have any other questions? No.
Oh, so much silence. I hope everyone.
I'm going to go on record one more time as an SLP. If you're coughing at a mealtime more than once a week, please call your doctor and get a referral, just because that means it's a pattern and you should address it, and you can address it, and you'll have techniques that you can use forever, and you can have a record of what was the problem before, so that if it crops up again, you know how to address it. Don't take that lightly. Okay. It's serious to me as a fall, right?
It's an
All right,
indicator.
folks. Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us again. We will have the slides and the video put up on the ipmdc.org website as soon as we get them edited.
Happy holidays.
Have a
Happy
great holiday.
holidays.
Thanks for coming in.
Thank you, everyone.
See ya.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.